business report. You've talked a lot in the past about...
We are back live with Bernanke's question. Here's a new question right now.
Long-term unemployment?
Well, first, you're absolutely right. Long-term unemployment in the current economy is the worst, really, the worst it's been in the post-war period. Currently, something like 45% of all the unemployed have been unemployed for 6 months or longer. And we know the consequences of that can be very distressing, because people who are out of work for a long time, their skills tend to atrophy. They lose contacts with the labor market, with their other people working the networks that they've built up. And we saw in the European experience, for example, in the 80s and 90s, that a period of high unemployment with very long-term unemployment spells can actually lead unemployment to remain very high for a protracted period. So it is a very significant concern. And it's one of the reasons that that the Federal Reserve has been so aggressive. By getting unemployment down, we hope to bring back to work some of the people who've been out of work as long as they have, and in that respect try to avoid the longer-term consequences of people being out of work for months at a time. So that's part of the reason that we have been as aggressive as we have. As the situation drags on, and as the long-term unemployed lose skills and lose contact with the labor market, or perhaps just become discouraged and stop looking for work, then it becomes really out of the scope of monetary policy. At that point, job training, education, and other types of interventions would probably be more effective than monetary policy.
And follow up, so a lot of the long-term unemployment we're seeing now, do you think that's out of the scope of what the Fed can do?
Well, indirectly, of course, if to the extent that we can help the economy recover and help job creation proceed, then some of the people who get jobs will be those who've been out of work for a long time. That being said, we don't have any tools for targeting long-term unemployment specifically. We can just try to make the labor market work better, broadly speaking.
Then John, then Mr. Rebecca.
Peter Barnes of Fox Business Network, Mr. Chairman. Last week, Standard & Poor's put the United States debt on a negative watch for the very first time ever. What is your reaction to that? And are you concerned, are you worried that the United States is going to lose its AAA credit rating?
Well, in one sense, S&P's action didn't really tell us anything, because everybody who reads the newspaper knows that the United States has a very serious long-term fiscal problem. That being said, I'm hopeful that this event will provide at least one more incentive for Congress and the administration to address this problem. I think it's the most important economic problem, at least in the longer term, that the United States faces. We currently have a fiscal deficit which is simply not sustainable over the longer term, and if it's not addressed, it will have significant consequences for financial stability, for economic growth, and for our standard of living. It is encouraging that we are seeing efforts on both sides of the aisle to think about this issue from a long-run perspective. It's not a problem that can be solved by making changes only for the next 6 months. It's really a long-run issue. We're still a long way from a solution, obviously, but it is, I think, of the highest importance that our political leaders address this very difficult problem as quickly and as effectively as they can. And to the extent that the S&P action goads a response, I think that's constructive.
Mr. Chairman, John Berry. In the past, there have been times when fiscal policy has tightened and the Federal Reserve has chosen to ease its policy in response partly to that, given whatever the circumstances in the economy were at the time. Congress appears intent at this point in cutting spending significantly, might restrain the economy as it appears to be doing in Britain, where they're following a similar path. Is there anything the Fed can do or should do if indeed there are large budget cuts sometime in the next 18 months?
Well, first, let me say that addressing the fiscal deficit, particularly the long-run unsustainable deficit, is a top priority, and nothing I would want to say should be construed as saying that I think it's anything other than the top priority. It's very, very important that our leaders address this issue. I would also say that the cuts that have been made so far don't seem to us to have very significant consequences for short-term economic activity. Now, my preference in terms of addressing the long-term deficit is to take
what I will do is we'll do another part, but that was very important about the deficit and everything that we talk about here and how the market was viewing it. As that was happening, the markets were breaking higher in the short term there. So what I'm going to do is start part 4 next.